This is Ron Savoya, Stratus Innovations Group, and welcome to another one of our Webinar Wednesdays. Today we're going to talk about Active Directory Federation for Office 365 and doing that within Windows Azure. Today's webinar is going to focus on a high level, a couple things. What is Active Directory Federation? What's the purpose of it for those that may not be familiar with it? What does a reference architecture for Active Directory Federation look like? What does that look like when you run it in your corporate environment? What do we think the downfalls and the issues are to running that in your corporate environment? And what would that reference architecture and more importantly, what would the value proposition be if you run that in a Windows Azure environment? We're going to cover those topics on today's webinar. In next week's webinar, we are going to walk you through doing a demonstration and showing you how to set up that reference architecture in Windows Azure, how it works, what it looks like, and so on. But let's jump right in and kind of cover the high level and the initial introduction of Active Directory Federation, Active Directory Federation for Office 365, doing that on premise and then in Windows Azure. So first piece in terms of Active Directory Federation for Office 365, what's the purpose of it? And the purpose is for single sign-on. So if you have a browser and you want to go to SharePoint Online, Outlook Web Access, or your Outlook client, it doesn't need to be prompted for credentials because connecting to Office 365, because Office 365 will validate your authorization and access to your on-premise domain controller. So the way that does it is as part of the reference architecture, there's two key pieces, essentially three, but two key pieces in the reference architecture. The first one is a federation service machine or a federation service farm. The purpose of the federation service machine is to simply authenticate to the domain controller, connect to the domain controller and say, hey, got this request to provide access to John. Is John authorized and authenticated? And the domain controller would say, yep, been authenticated. He has access. His account's not locked out. So good to go. That communication, all of this communication in Active Directory Federations will be done via SAML tokens, so Security Access Markup Language tokens. So tokens will simply be sent from node to node along the process. The other key piece of the Active Directory Federation is the Federation proxy farm. And the purpose of the proxy is because typically clients, which could be in workstations, laptops, or services like Office 365 will be not on your corporate network, but be located out over the internet, off your domain. And when that happens, they need to authenticate via a proxy. They're going to have to connect over the internet and authenticate to that. You don't want to expose your federation service directly to the internet. So what you do is you put a federation service proxy, a federation proxy in place, and you NAT it behind your firewall to take that incoming request. It then proxies it, sends it over to the federation service, which connects to your domain controller, and then continues the process from there. The other key, somewhat key aspect of this is that because of the importance, and again, this is for Office 365 single sign-on, when your domain is federated with Office 365, meaning that you have single sign-on to Office 365, Office 365 will not provide you access unless it receives a positive authentication and authorization from your domain controller. So if any node in this architecture, if the Federation Service node or the Federation Proxy node is down, Office 365 will not be able to authenticate you, so it will deny access to the clients. What your end users will notice will be anytime that your Federation Service environment is down, the Active Directory Federation service environment is down, they'll constantly be prompted for passwords and they won't be able to connect. And then finally, it'll just give up and it'll say working offline needs password in Outlook, or in SharePoint Online or Outlook Web Access, it'll just say access denied. You've got to have this in a highly available, highly redundant model in order to keep that service up running 7 by 24. So what you do is you put that federation service environment in a farm and sit it behind a network load balancer, and you do the same for the federation proxy. It's in a farm sitting behind that network load balancer. The issues that we see with doing this on your corporate environment are twofold. The first one is financial. Even if you use a virtualized environment, that's still a pretty hefty infrastructure. You have two federation service machines in a farm, you have two federation proxies in a farm, and you have to invest in two network load balancers, whether it's an appliance, whether it's a physical device, a virtual device. You still have to invest in that infrastructure. So that could be a pretty hefty price tag just simply to say, hey, I'm going to authenticate my clients. And depending on the size of your organization, you may want more than two federation service machines in a farm or more than two federation proxies in a farm. So the financial side of this gets to be a little hefty. The other key area that we see, which is probably more likely and more of an issue, it's that you have a single point of failure in your environment, and that is your telco, your internet connection, your wide area network connection. And again, the issue, as we said, because Office 365 is located over the internet, it has to authenticate with your environment. It does so by contacting your federation proxy. And the way it knows that, Office 365, when you go through the PowerShell to federate, you tell it what that endpoint is, what that URL is, something like adfs.acme.com, sts.acme.com, which is a publicly routable IP address, which points to your federation proxy farm. And if it can't reach that, then it stops working. So we think that's a major issue. So let's walk you through, and to kind of see how and why that is an issue, let's walk you through seeing what the kind of following that token access as a client goes to access Office 365 services in this type of reference architecture with an on-premise ADFS environment. So as I mentioned, this is what that reference architecture looks like on premise. We have the client machine sitting on that same corporate network. That client machine could be located over the internet. Out externally, it could be somebody on the road, a remote employee, could be working from home, wherever. But the key is the first thing that happens is that client says, I'm going to try to contact Office 365 services. I'm going to reach out over the network, over the internet, and contact Office 365. Again, it could be SharePoint Online, it could be Exchange Online, whatever. So the first thing that Office 365 is going to do, as I mentioned, is going to say, oh, I see this domain, we're federated with it, so let me find the endpoint to contact, and that endpoint that it contacts is the federation, the public-facing federation proxy, which is natted through the firewall. So it says, okay, I'm going to contact that federation proxy, and I'm going to say, John wants access. Can you tell me if he's authenticated and he's got access? The proxy says, yep, I got it. I'm going to send it over to the federation service machine, or the federation service farm. Yep, got it. I'm going to send it over to the domain controller. Domain controller is going to look, say, yep, John has been authenticated. John's logged in. He has access. It's going to mark up that token, say, yep, it's valid, and send that over through the federation service, back to the federation service, which sends it to the federation proxy, and then returns that to the Office 365 service, and Office 365 is going to look at it, say, yep, that person's authenticated, we're good to go, and I'm going to send that token back to the client, and away we go. We're on Exchange Online, we're on SharePoint Online. Everything works hunky-dory on that, except if and when your internet connection goes down. If your internet connection goes down, as we mentioned, that process comes to an immediate halt. Clients, and again, the way that you see that is clients are constantly being asked for credentials. Again, Outlook clients are constantly prompted. You try to get Outlook web access via browser or SharePoint Online. You'll put your credentials in, and it will ask you for it again. You're like, man, I know that's right, but it'll constantly be prompting for that. And then eventually SharePoint Online and Outlook Web Access will simply come back to you and say access denied. So in order to address that situation, we've got an offering in place to do that federation environment in Office 365. So let's show you what that would look like and why we think that is a value proposition. So again, here is that same reference architecture sitting in Windows Azure. The key to doing this, the key point of doing this is that Windows Azure and Office 365 are in the exact same Microsoft Online Services data centers, which means that traffic never goes out over the wide area to be authenticated, meaning that SAML token is never kind of getting passed over the wide area. And also because of all those services sitting in the same data center, it's all extremely high speed network access that all of this is happening. So it's happening in almost complete real time. So that's the key piece that we kind of see in this. The only difference of that, the only difference of the reference architecture is you set up the Federation service farm and Federation proxy farm a little different than using a network load balancing device, but we'll show you that in our next webinar. So again, using the same analogy, a client located, let's say your telco line in your corporate environment goes down. You have clients, they go home, they go down the street to Starbucks, wherever, and they want to connect to Office 365. They do so over the public internet. They access Office 365. Office 365 says, oh, I see that domain is authenticated. I need to reach out to the endpoint, the web services endpoint that's been published for that, which is your Federation service proxy, or the Federation proxy. So it sends it to that Federation proxy, which is on the exact same data center environment as Office 365. Then that proxy, of course, sends it over to the Federation service, which sends it over to the domain controller that you have in Office 365. The domain controller sends that back through the Federation service, through the Federation proxy to Office 365 and says, yep, that person is valid and authenticated. And so at that point, Office 365 comes back and says, you're good to go. And at that, nowhere in that process did you ever see that token, that SAML token, have to go into your corporate environment. So that covers this webinar for now at a high level. And what we're going to go over next week is showing you the ability to have and how to stand up that Active Directory Federation reference architecture within Windows Azure. So until next week, we look forward to connecting. Thanks. Bye.